Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Hi there. I came here because I need to get a restraining order. Can you guys help me with that?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Yeah. So, what's the purpose of your request?
Well, I need a restraining order because I'm afraid my boyfriend has been hurting me.
Okay. How's he been hurting you?
Well, the most recent thing that happened was on Saturday, and he was yelling at me, and I was just telling him that I was going to move out, and then he threw a beer bottle at me. It didn't hit me, but at that point I just said, "That's it." You know, nobody throws stuff at me. That's not fair.
Were the cops called?
I didn't call the cops because I didn't want to get the police involved.
Why didn't you want to get the police involved?
Well, because I figured I knew about this clinic, and I thought that I could come here and just get a restraining order. I don't want him to go to jail. I just want to be safe. I just don't want him to. And I've got 2 text messages from him on Sunday, and then I got a phone call from him today. I haven't written back, but I just, at least for a little while, I think I just need some space.
So you guys live at the same residence currently?
Well, I've been living at his apartment, but now I'm staying with another friend of mine. And I left on Saturday. I've been staying with another friend of mine. I don't know how long I can stay there, but I don't want to go back with him right now.
How long have you been living with him in the apartment?
About 6 or 7 months, since about this summer.
You guys have your kids together?
And I'm sorry, when did he hit you? When did he say?
Well, he threw a beer bottle at me on Saturday.
Saturday?
It was Saturday night. And he's been yelling at me a lot this past week. I'm not really sure why. But it's just been getting worse and worse. And then when he threw that beer bottle at me, and somebody told me that I can just go to court and get a restraining order, and then he can't call me anymore. Do you know how long that process takes? Can I get one today? You know?
You definitely can't get one today.
Okay.
Not if you come in at 5 o'clock.
What's that?
Not if you come in at 5 o'clock for the street clinic.
Okay, well, but I mean, can I get one before the end of today? If I go,
I don't believe you can get one today.
can I get one tomorrow? I mean, I just want to know. I mean, do I need to hire a lawyer, or is there a free lawyer?
While they're looking at that, does the clinic work with any like victim advocacy groups in Boise at all? Any associations?
I don't know. Do you know?
So that's
Are you behind the rent back? How long have you been there, and how far behind?
So can I say something off record outside of the interview?
Okay, that's fair.
What my theory is, but I'm not sure at this point. So I think you can get a restraining order because there has been violence in a dating relationship. But I'm not sure at this point how soon that can happen. I didn't quite catch that.
So then, while we're off record, I mean, really, what you want to do here is just gather the information that you need to be able to, because at the clinic, you're going to be able to take this back and talk with a lawyer about it.
Right, because we can't give advice. I mean,
Well, you can pass on advice from the attorney, so that's what will happen is you'll go back and sometimes the attorney will come out, talk with the client with you. Sometimes it'll be simple enough that it can say, well, you just tell this person, these 3 or 4 things.
Right.
So what your focus should be right now in the next, say, 10 minutes or so while we do this exercise, and then we'll talk about it after that, is just to gather as much information as you think you need, and it's fine to look at the stuff that you got today, so that you can take that back and explain the situation and hopefully catch all of the enough details at least. You probably won't be able to catch all the details, but catch enough details that you can spot the major issues.
Right, because in this case, you told us a lot of what we already needed to know. I mean, you were dating, you were hooker, you lived together, you sort of kind of whatnot. So, do we need to ask more detail than what we've already found out?
Well,
let's
say I'm not going to tell you, but spend about another 5 to 7 minutes to see if there's, if you don't have any more questions, that's fine. Just let me know.
Oh no, we can definitely ask a ton of questions. I'm just wondering, since we are trying to make this as expedited as possible, we could go really detailed and we can try to find all the legal issues we can. But
that's a good point, and I would say for the street law clinic, I think generally, unless you encounter something that's obviously straightforward or obviously really complex, spending about 10 to 15 minutes just to make sure you've covered all your bases is usually a good idea. That's what I generally get the sense that students are spending about 10 to 15 minutes before they come back. So let's take another 5 minutes if you want to. If you have any more questions, if you don't, that's fine.
You should find out if he fears that there's a likelihood of it happening again. Like there's an immediate danger.
What was the question?
Is there an immediate danger that you feel it's going to happen again?
Yeah.
threatened?
That's I do. I don't want to go back. I mean, I've never had anybody throw anything at me. I've never been hit before, but I think he's too angry about something right now. I don't know what it is, but he seems to be kind of having a breakdown.
So you said he threw a beer bottle?
He threw a beer bottle.
Did it strike you?
No, it missed me. But
What was going on before he threw the beer bottle? Were you having an argument?
he was yelling at me.
Were you yelling back?
I was trying to explain what was going on because I've been trying to find a job, and he's upset because part of the reason he's upset is that I haven't been able to contribute to the rent. And that was our agreement when I moved in, that I would come up with, I didn't have to come up with half of the rent because has had a job for a long time, but that I would at least come up with about 25% of the rent. And I haven't been working over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and so when for January, I wasn't able to give him anything, and he was explaining to me. I mean, I was trying to explain to him that all the stuff that I've been doing, and he just wasn't satisfied, and
Did you
just kind of escalated from there.
And I know I'm not trying to say that I think you did anything, but did you respond in any way, or was there anything that you might have done that might have upset him beyond just words?
Well, the only thing I can think of is that he was yelling at me, and I said, "Look, don't talk to me like that, okay? Don't talk to me like that." So I went into the bedroom and I slammed the door, and that's where he pushed the door open and he threw the beer bottle. Because as soon as he came in, I just went behind the bed, and that's when he just threw the beer bottle across the room and hit the bookshelf or something. I don't know what it did, but.
So did he throw it directly at you, or did he just throw it at the wall in your general direction?
I think he was trying to hit me.
Had he been drinking?
Yeah, we both been drinking.
Both been drinking.
Do you have any stuff like that in the apartment?
Yeah, I do, but I mean, is there any way to get that? I don't know. I took my laptop with me, I took my phone, I took my bag with me, but I've got clothes there, I've got some books left over from school.
And you said you guys do not have kids, there's no kids involved in your relationship?
I don't have any kids, he doesn't have any kids.
Are you on the agreement for the apartment, or is it his apartment and
No,
you're just living
because
with him?
before we had asked, I had sent in an application to the landlord to be added to the lease, but they said that we had to pay application fee, and so we didn't want to do that. So I just figured, like,
Okay.
And I'm sorry, what you said this has never happened before,
that he's thrown a beer bottle at me?
or any violent act.
Well, since about kind of like starting before the holidays, like I just kind of get the sense that he's been more and more angry about everything, and
Has it turned violent?
he's like slammed his hand down on the table a couple of times when he's been talking to me, and then he's kind of like he'll follow me around the apartment. And like I'll go. That's like kind of what happened. Like on Saturday night was like I was just like I'm not going to communicate like this. And so I went into the bedroom and I just knew he was going to come in. I was just waiting for him because he'll just follow me around because he like just wants to tell me all this stuff about I should be doing this. He constantly is wanting like giving me advice. Like you should why didn't you call like my uncle? I told you to call my uncle about whatever. And so I didn't expect that when he came in the bedroom this time that he would throw something at me, and that's when I said, "That's it, I'm going."
Right. So this was the first time that he attempted to actually be violent with you. That you would say that you think. I mean,
That's the first time that I ever thought that I was going to get physically hurt.
Is he gonna have roughly the same account of what happened, how things went down, or would he potentially have a different story of how this confrontation took place?
Well, I would hope that he would admit it. I mean, he knows why I left. He sent me he sent me a text message that said, "I'm sorry. Maybe we can have a conversation over coffee or something and just iron this out." But I didn't respond to that, and then he called me earlier today.
Do you still have that text message?
Yeah, I still have it.
And what did you do directly after you threw that beer bottle? Is that where you left?
That's when I said, I'm going to go, and so I went into the other room, and he followed me into the other room, and that's when I got my laptop and my bag and my phone. Actually, my phone charger is still there, but whatever.
And where did you go?
I went to another friend's house.
And were you upset when you got to this friend's house?
Yeah.
And so she could testify about your state of mind?
And did you tell your friend everything that happened?
Well, you mean on Saturday?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Right after
I mean,
it
we talked
happened.
about Saturday. I didn't go into
You didn't
the
go
whole stuff before because
Right.
we hadn't. I mean, I hadn't really talked to anybody about that, but I was just like, okay, here's the deal. It got really upset with me, and
Hey, Richie.
Well, she had two of them.
okay, no, we can wrap up. So, I think you guys did a good job.
Ready to kill her.
Those are all the right questions for a domestic violence protection order situation. I mean, you want to, particularly you want to try to draw out that other side of the story. And, that's a good question to ask. What would he say? Sometimes, I mean, the threat of court actually works for a lot of people, and you can say if you, for this protection order, you may have to go in front of a judge and swear under oath as to exactly what happened. So is there anything, if you're telling the complete truth, that you have left out? Because you're going to have to tell the judge that, and the judge is eventually going to hear from him. And what do you think he's going to tell the judge? I don't care what is true. I want to know what he's going to tell the judge. So you started to do that. I think you did a pretty good job. There were also a couple of tendrils of things that I threw in there that you could have pursued. I had a couple of things in mind that you didn't ask about. Like when I said that I was having a hard time getting a job, that's maybe worth in many situations saying, so what's your line of work? And if you had asked me that question, I would say, well, it's really tough because I'm from South Africa and I'm not authorized to work here. And all of a sudden you would realize, okay, I have an immigration issue. If you or if you had pressed on the calling the police, you ask, why didn't you call the police? I said, I just didn't want him to be thrown in jail. Another reason I didn't want to call the police is because I don't want anybody to know that I was here. I was supposed to be studying at BSU, but now I dropped out and I'm supposed to go back to South Africa. So always
okay to
kind
go
of
down this
always kind of try to get a little bit of information. If somebody says they're having a hard time with anything, it's usually a good time to say, well, what's the hard time with that? So, oh well, it's just that whatever. But yeah, I think generally you guys, that's it. And after you gather that information, you would go back to the attorney, and you don't have to feel bad. Like, don't end up, especially at the street law clinic, don't end up with sleepless nights if you think that you didn't ask all of the questions, because people understand that this is a relatively short amount of time. They come in asking for a restraining order. They're not going to be that disappointed, I hope, if you don't spot the fact that maybe they also have a housing issue, which you did ask about. The fact that if I do go back there, like potentially, I'm exposing myself to trouble with the landlord. He could call the police and have me trespassed because I'm not on the lease, whereas if I was on the lease, I couldn't be trespassed. But things like, there are a few things that I think are always worth asking about, and one of them is, probably the main one, is immigration, because almost every issue that somebody has, the advice that you give them is going to be different if they have immigration consequences, because simply going to court could be something that ends up exposing the immigration, and particularly in a domestic violence situation like this one, the other person, if they have good status in the United States, can, and often do, use that as leverage. They'll call immigration enforcement or do something like that, and so you want to be able to think about what are we going to do about that. The other thing that I think is always worth asking about in any issue is, are you on probation or parole? Because people on probation or parole, first of all, everything they do has consequences. Like if I told you I'm on probation or parole, a lot of people on parole and some people on probation have to have permission from their parole officer to even be in a dating relationship. And so if I hadn't let my parole officer know that, and all of a sudden I'm filing a domestic violence protection order, I could be parole violated and go back to prison. So it's a simple question to ask: are you on probation or parole? Sometimes if you ask somebody if they are a citizen or whatever, they will, because they don't know who you are, but you can just say, hey, do you have any reason to be concerned about your immigration status? And they might say, well, some of them are just still going to not tell you, not disclose that information because they're too worried about who knows. But other than that, I think you drew out the main points. Any questions?
I have a question. Sorry, does anybody else before I dive in? Regarding immigration status, if say they are afraid to disclose that, are you able to kind of give a disclaimer that says you're not going to report them if they aren't?
Yeah, you can say that. You can say, a good way to open, actually that's a good point that I hadn't thought about mentioning at this thing today, but a good thing to remind people, because a lot of people don't know, at the very beginning of the interview, the same way if any of you have ever been to, good healthcare practitioners do this, good counselors do this, and good lawyers do this. At the beginning of the interview, explain that explain what the situation is. I'm a law student working with lawyers. We're here to give you counsel and advice if we can, or if not, we can refer you places. And everything that you tell me is confidential. I have or at least the attorney has an ethical obligation, and I will promise you that everything that you're telling me, it's going to be between you and me and the lawyers that are working at the clinic. We're not going to tell anybody else, and that gives them that reassurance, because a lot of people simply don't know that. Especially in a clinic situation, they may think that, hey, all this stuff is going to end up, written on a piece of paper somewhere that somebody's going to get. And so you can give them that stuff, and particularly if you've got, if somebody's got limited English proficiency, even though we're not, at the profile people, but if somebody has limited English proficiency, or they have other indications about them that make you think, okay, this person might be an immigrant. You can even mention that specifically. Say, hey, look, and you can feel safe with me if you've got any immigration concerns, because I'm not going to tell the police, I'm not going to tell the courts, the lawyer's not going to tell the police, not going to tell the courts, nobody's going to know other than us. We're not going to call immigration, we're not going to do any of that stuff, just to let them feel safe about disclosing that information. That's something they didn't really talk about, and it's really difficult in a very short amount of time to build a trust relationship other than just by beating it over their head and saying, hey, this is confidential, whatever you tell me. But, in your demeanor, in your body language, being accepting and being trusting can draw more out of somebody than, if you just show up and act like the resident at the hospital, what's your complaint, blah, 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 like you're checking on the list. Anything else?
See, this is, but in this case,
I have another question. Sure. If you do ask them, since you keyed that you should ask about probation or parole, if say they are violating their probation or their parole, is there a certain point that we're ethically obligated to report them? There's absolutely no point that we have to.
No, arguably, well, it's actually interesting because you guys are law students. So arguably, lawyers and maybe law students, if you have credible evidence of child abuse disclosed to you, like if someone says, my child is being beaten, or I'm beating my child, or somebody is sexually abusing my child, you need to tell them that they've got a duty to report it, and that you may have a duty to report it. And at that point, if you end up with a situation where you've got a report of child abuse and you're concerned that the person's not going to report it, or that it hasn't already been reported, talk to the lawyers about that, because the way the statute is written, everybody in Idaho seems to have a mandatory obligation to report child abuse, but not, just because you think there's child abuse is a little bit different than if you reasonably should know that there's some sort of child abuse going on. So that's a tough call to make, particularly when we're talking about a clinical situation where we've got a duty of confidentiality, or at least the lawyers do as well, and those should be talked out. But reporting probation and parole violations, absolutely not. You have a duty, or at least the lawyers have a duty, not to tell anybody about that, because
And you can advise them, like, you violated probation, when you go to court with it, but it's going to come out.
Right.
Are you sure that's something you want to do?
I don't know.
Right. Well, I guess I ask about probation and parole. So once you go down that path, and if they say yes, you just want to probe them about as many questions or as much information as you can get out from there.
Well, you just
Or regarding.
that's just a flat. I mean, for the purpose of street law clinic, I think if you just simply ask that question and say, "Hey, you're not on probation or parole, are you?" No. And just if somebody says no, just say, "I need." I'm not saying that you look that way. I'm just saying that I need to know that, because that could change the analysis. Just flag that and let the lawyers know, because it's just, unfortunately, when you're on probation or parole, you've got your rights are so limited and so modified, and things that you do can result in, as a practical matter, in retaliation in a way that other people don't have to think about those things. So, but yeah, immigration is the same way. It just kind of pervades your life to the extent that it kind of, anything you do legally, you need to take that into consideration.
There's also a thing.
All right. Well, thanks. We're going to do one more thing in a second after they wrap up these other tables. And